We've got so much natty prep to get to. We brought Spencer in for some help.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Spencer McLaughlin. He's the host of Locked On Pac-12, Locked On Ducks. You know him. You love him. Thank you for making this your first.
Do they love me? Do they love me, or do they tolerate me?
It might depend on the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Spencer. I know how excited you are about Washington being in the national championship game. So That's why Lars and I wanted to make sure that we got you on this week to have a little bit of fun. And so we're going to jump right into it here. What do you think Washington's biggest advantage over Michigan is? Because I think it's very obviously the passing game. And I think that Washington is going to give Michigan a real run for their money, since, we have to talk about it that way, since Michigan is favored despite what some people in their circle are saying.
Yeah, I mean, and Washington has just really struggled as an underdog in the last 2 years under Kalen DeBoer. They've sucked. I think that for Washington, the biggest advantage is get more specific than just the passing game. It's the quarterback. I am not a big JJ McCarthy fan. I think he's better than Cade McNamara because he's got a better arm and he is more mobile. And that's why they made the change. And it's been a positive change. And he's won a playoff game and McNamara did not. But I think that McCarthy is pretty average. I've watched him several times this year. I've never been impressed. Last year, for instance, when they beat Ohio State, pulled away late in that game, he had these big pass completions and whatnot. It was to guys that were wide open, like they were coverage busts. And, he was getting the ball off under duress, but he wasn't making ridiculously accurate throws. And whenever I see, a top quarterbacks prospect list for the 2024 NFL draft, and I see McCarthy inside the top 5, I'm like, I take Penix over Bo Nix over that guy every day of the week and twice on Sundays. Yep. I really would. There are a number of quarterbacks that I would take ahead of him. It's not that, again, I don't think he's incapable. He's competent. But to say that I feel that he can win the game or even do anything close to being a well above average quarterback in a game like this, I haven't seen it. I have not seen it. And the Alabama defense is very good. I'll grant you that. It's not the first time I've watched McCarthy and just thought he and this Michigan offense are just okay. I've only watched the Washington offense once this year and thought they were just okay. And it's when everybody had the flu and in a classic emotional letdown spot against Arizona State. Now, granted, that was a poor performance regardless of what was going on, but that still is the only time, one out of 14 games this year, where I've thought, man, Penix just doesn't have it today. Like, that just hasn't really been the case consistently, despite what Heisman voters think. So I think that's where the edge really is for Washington here. And I picked them to beat Texas, and I heard a lot of flack. I got a lot of flack from Texas fans for that, because that's the way it works. No fans team is ever actually going to lose a football game like that. That's never happened.
I have some off-air stories I'll tell you after.
I can't wait for that. But just to put a bow on it, I picked Washington against Texas because I looked at the way that Washington threw the football and the way Texas defended the pass and said, if the dominant part of your defense is your defensive line, that's not going to be good enough, because Washington's offensive line is better than everybody thinks. Even though they've won the Joe Moore Award, I think they still get overshadowed consistently because they're such an integral part of what they do. They run the football better than you think. They run it in key spots. I mean, the 4th and 1 at, the 29, 31, 32-yard line, not just against Washington State, but against Texas as well. They ran the football, and Troy Faltano, who's going to be a first-round pick, just collapses the line down. I mean, I could have run for that first down. He's really good. So I think that's where Washington's biggest advantage is. I love their O-line, and I think the quarterback gap. I trust Penix implicitly to make a play late. I don't trust JJ McCarthy.
So all of these things are why I went with passing game as a whole. So I'm really glad you brought that up. First off, shout out to Troy Fautanu. I'm standing next to him during the Sugar Bowl trophy presentation, and he's just yelling up at the stage, ESPN doesn't want football. That's basketball on grass. Oh, it's fantastic. Loved every second of it. Put a little bit of that out on Twitter for all the everydayers to go check out over there. But so this is everything that you just said, plus a little bit extra, is why I went with Washington's passing game as a whole. Because you talked about all of those points. All those points are very valid. Michael Penix had one of the best games I've ever seen from a quarterback in the Sugar Bowl. He made just unbelievable throws, like the second touchdown pass he threw to Jalen McMillan. He threw it through the keyhole, basically. It was a fantastic throw, but you did all of that and made all those fantastic points and didn't once say the name Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, or Jalen Polk. And Ohio State has some really good receivers, but with what Kyle McCord was doing this year, they didn't really have to necessarily be concerned about them in the same way that they do with what Washington brings to the table, not just in terms of talent from those three wide receivers, but schematically as well. Because Ryan Grubb has just been so good in so many big spots this year at making sure, and there have been some questionable play calls, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he's perfect, but he has made so many just amazing adjustments in game and just done the right thing so many times this year in terms of making sure the play call is right, making sure the scheme is right, and just knowing how to counter what the defense wants to do. I feel that it's just going to be a massive advantage for the Huskies in terms of that passing game. But Michigan's defensive line, they're really good too. And yes, I'm very confident in Washington's offensive line being able to, I don't want to use the term hold up because that makes me feel like I'm going to doubt them, which I'm absolutely not doing, but it making sure that Michael Penix has a clean pocket for the majority of the night. And I just think that you put all those things together, that's something that Michigan has not seen yet this year. Spencer, I was writing something over on Inside the Huskies. It should be up by the time all the everydayers out there are listening to this. And one of the things that was in there is that in terms of scoring offense, Michigan has seen three teams that average the top 50 in points per game. Whereas Washington has played 3 games against teams that are in the top 20 in terms of scoring defense, the 2 against Oregon and then Texas. And they're averaging 35 points in those games. So I think that Washington is going to stick to their guns. We'll see, what the health of Dillon Johnson looks like. He probably is going to play. We'll see how many snaps he plays, but it's just, I feel that that's just so big for this Washington team because this passing attack is like nothing Michigan has seen this season.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the closest comparison would be Ohio State. They don't have a third receiver that's as good as what Washington's got with Jalen Polk as their number 3. They certainly don't have a number 4 that's Jeremy Bernard, who made a great catch in, what was it, the first quarter of that game? Yep. Penix takes the downfield shot. You're like, oh, is it Odunze? Is it McMillan? Is it Polk? Oh, this is Jeremy Bernard just making that same sort of back shoulder catch. Like, it's clearly something they worked on.
Don't forget Jack Westover at tight end.
Yeah, cannot forget. He had a really nice game as well at the big third down catch on that drive down to kick the field goal to make it a 2-score game. But you talked about Ryan Grubb, and to say that I'm surprised he did not garner a head coaching position for next year, he might just not have found the right one, because I think he continues to show why he's a high-level coordinator. He was a finalist for the Broyles Award, yeah?
Semifinal. He was a finalist, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, he was up there, and he was up there for a reason, and, he just understands his personnel so well. Like, Penix throws the best deep ball in the country. His receivers are ridiculously good in 50-50 spots. And the other thing, too, is I'm sure Washington fans know this as well as I have, or, come to know it over the course of really the last couple months, but the entire season. But as I've watched more highlights and whatnot, I've just kind of noticed that Washington runs a lot of double moves. That is a big part of their offense. And Grubb knows he can call those all the time because they execute the out routes or the hitch routes kind of early in the game to set that stuff up. But the receivers are just so fluid and such good route runners and so explosive that they can execute those time and time again. And Penix throws a great ball and the offensive line gives them time. That's what makes them so important. The deep shots are sometimes just straight go routes, like the fade route to Odunze late in the game down the sideline where, you just had stack coverage, Penix saw man and just threw it to a spot and Odunze was there, and they've been doing that all season long. But the double moves are able to work over and over again because Grubb knows his offensive line is good enough to hold up. And the other thing, too, is Penix just drops back like 9-10 yards, and guess what? It takes longer to get to him there. He's got a good enough arm to push it down the field. He's accurate enough. It's just week in and week out, they're executing at a really high level. And inside a dome in Houston, I don't expect there to be any issues throwing the football.
Couldn't agree with you more. So now, Spencer, we're going to flip to the other side of the ball, and we're going to get to where Washington needs to make sure that they can be as solid as possible. What advantage Michigan might have over them. And we're going to send a message to our good friends over at Game Time, because if you're going to be in Houston, you shouldn't be stressed if you're trying to buy tickets to the national championship. And Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Some of the coolest things about Game Time are the last-minute tickets, the flash deals, the zone deals. They've got all kinds of deals on there, and you can get a view from every single seat in the venue. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. All-in prices show your total upfront, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out, and you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So, Spencer, we're gonna flip to what advantage Michigan has over Washington, and it's got to be the run game, right? Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, they're really, really good at what they do. Michigan's got a fantastic offensive line there, and Texas was able to rip off a whole bunch of chunk plays on the ground against Washington, and then they go down, they kind of move away from it a little bit, they fumble twice. There were a lot of things that seemed to prevent Texas from trying to stick on the ground, which is something that you talked about JJ McCarthy a little bit at the open of the show, where Jim Harbaugh, I don't want to say take the ball out of JJ McCarthy's hands, but just wants to lean on what that offense has done really well all year, which is put the ball in Blake Corum's hands and let him go to work.
Yeah, I think that's such a foundational part of Michigan's offense. You look at what they did against Penn State in the second half. Josh Pate whipped out the old Sarah McLaughlin special, where it was Michigan's drive chart in the second half. Run. So if you cannot stop the run, Michigan will just never pass it. Because like I said, I think Michigan feels differently about JJ McCarthy than the rest of the country feels about JJ McCarthy. If you are willing to go through an entire half of football against a top 10 team in a big game on the road and never feel the need to put the ball up in the air, I think they did once and got a pass interference out of it. That was it. If you don't feel that that's something your offense needs to do to succeed, your quarterback is not that special. He can be good. He can be competent. He's not that special. And so the run game can be, and that is going to be the biggest factor for Washington defensively. It's not pressuring McCarthy, who might throw it to a purple jersey one way or the other, over the course of the game. He's mobile. He can run. I think you got to watch out for his legs a little bit, but if you can't stop Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards between the tackles, that will be a vehicle for Michigan to score points and to make Michael Penix watch the game instead of play the game. And I think that is going to be the game plan, because we've seen over the last couple of years, Washington's run defense hit and miss. And I think that against Texas, I don't think it was very good. I think what happened is Washington's offense was so good and Texas's defense couldn't stop them that Texas felt they had to get away from the run and go to Quinn Ewers, who was not good in that football game, never got into a rhythm. And Washington secondary, I think, is the best element of their defense. Well, I don't know. The pass rush is very, very good. Braylon Trice was awesome in that game.
Fantastic game.
He was outstanding. So I think you could go either way on that front. But I think for Washington, you'd rather defend the pass than defend the run. And it's just been something that they've had their moments with, but I think not everyone's been able to exploit it as often as they want to, because Washington's offense is so good. The other team feels we got to keep up. It's like a team that wants to shoot a bunch of threes, playing the Houston Rockets with Mike D'Antoni, James Harden, Chris Paul, like those teams. Okay. When they got it going from three, if they were going against a team that, could kill you from the mid range, it takes a lot of mental discipline and execution for you to continue, or you feel like you're just going to fall behind because 3 is more than 2. And if they're hitting them at a high clip, you're just not going to be able to keep up. And so when Michigan got down double digits in that game, that took them out of what they wanted to do. And I don't think that the game plan from Steve Sarkisian was adhered to. I think it was for a little while, but then they got to, and the fumbles were killers. The fumbles were absolute killers because they were still moving the ball. They were down, I believe, 10 points, if memory serves, and they ripped off that big run and then fumbled at the end of it.
Dropped the ball. Yep.
Yeah, like they were still able to run the ball, but it never felt like Texas's run game was controlling the tempo. It always felt like they were playing to try and keep up with Washington. And so the controlling the tempo in this game is going to be really, really important. And I think if you're Michigan, you take the ball first. You take the ball first if you win the coin. I think either team, I am normally a proponent of if you win the toss, defer. The ability to go on a run in the middle 8, which is something a lot of college football coaches talk about. I don't know how much DeBoer's mentioned it, but Dan Lanning has been, harping on that over the last couple of years. And Oregon's been a very good team in that middle 8 over the last 2 seasons. It's how they've won a lot of games and pulled away from some teams. I'm normally a fan of that. In this particular matchup, I'm not about it. If I'm winning the toss, give me the football. Because if you're Washington, you have the opportunity to go down the field and make Michigan feel that sense of, okay, we have to score a touchdown here. We have to score a touchdown. Is our defense going to be able to get a lot of stops? And if you're Michigan, you can make Penix just sit over there and go on even a drive that is like Washington's opening drive of the Pac-12 championship game. It wasn't a bunch of explosive plays. Dink, dunk, execute, run, dink, dunk. One big play. I think they had to do Odunze, and then they were held to a field goal. But it took all the time off the clock, and then Oregon's offense was never in sync until midway through really the end of the second quarter. So I think that that's the game plan if you're Michigan, and if you're Washington and you're able to stop the run, and you put the onus on J.J. McCarthy to make throws, I don't trust him to go win that game.
So one thing I'm really curious about, because I love everything you said there. One thing I'm really curious about, just kind of on the other side of that, because we're on Locked On Huskies. We're going to talk about how we think the Huskies can win this game. And I want to hear you say it at some point. But we'll get there.
Are you going to ask me for my prediction? Because I don't have a score prediction, but I got a team prediction.
I'll get something out of you at the very end here.
Okay.
But one thing that I'm really curious about is because Washington did such a fantastic job of stopping the run against Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. It's something I talked to Chuck Morrell about a little bit during media day. And he said, yeah, it was really helpful that, we're so familiar with them at this point. We know what they like to do and we know how to counter it. So obviously it's going to be a little bit different going against Michigan, but I'm really curious to see if they just try to deploy some of the same tactics they did, where they did such a good job of not letting Bucky Irving just break outside the tackle. They kept him exactly where they wanted to, and they tackled.
They tackled so well in that game.
Yes. And the tackling against Texas was okay. It wasn't amazing, but it wasn't terrible. And we've seen some games that were truly just baffling in terms of tackling from this team. So I'm really curious if they just say, we're going to load up the box and we dare you to beat us with J.J. McCarthy. Because I know they're really confident in Jabbar Muhammad on one side. Elijah Jackson's been up and down a little bit, and then he makes the play of his life to send Washington to the national championship. So I'm really curious just to see what the game plan is, because it's stopping the run, and because Michigan has a fantastic run game, and how is Washington going to counter that? I really think that it might be just load up the box with 7-8 guys and just say, okay, we dare you to beat us through the air. If that's what happens, maybe we can live with that, but we know that we can score really quickly on anybody too.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I would be so all in stopping the run because I don't know what about the Michigan passing game scares me. J.J. McCarthy doesn't scare me. The receivers, they're fine. They're worse than Texas's guys. And Texas's receivers didn't really do very much in the football game.
Like Xavier Worthy got locked up, man. Shout out to
Muhammad. Like that's what I'm saying. And Muhammad played really well against Troy Franklin in the Pac-12 championship game as well. Like that dude is a bona fide stud. And so I just look at the way this Washington defense has played and when they've played well. And, you mentioned the Oregon game in December. What's interesting is remind me, who's Washington's defensive coordinator?
Chuck Morrell. Chuck Morrell and William Inge have the co-DC title.
Okay, got you. So I think they did a really good job adjusting the Pac-12 title game, because in each of the two previous matchups, I know that they were both wins as well, but Bucky Irving and Jordan James and Noah Whittington, like in 2022 and in October in Seattle, they ran the football really, really well.
Yeah,
they were able to run the football in a successful fashion. In December, that wasn't there. Bucky Irving was bottled up. There were a couple of good runs from Jordan James. I thought the Ducks should have gone to him more, but there just weren't massive holes. And I think that was a representation of the adjustments that they made on that side of the ball to what Oregon liked to do. But to your point, Michigan runs the ball differently. Oregon runs a lot of counter. They run a lot of counter. They run GT counter. They run, GH counter. They run double tight end counter. There's a play that they ran a couple times that that we saw in the cinematic recap against Utah that was called train right march, where they've got 3 in tight to the right. 2 of them are tight ends, and they pull through, and that's kind of your counter action. They did that a lot, and Washington had the answers for it. Oregon didn't make enough of an effort, in my view, to go and try and establish the run and introduce different concepts there, and they were too reliant on Bo Nix sometimes. But I think that the adjustments there, normally I would have said, well, look at what Oregon did in those games and just go and, run that same sort of stuff. But Washington had the adjustment. They made a change, and it was effective with this very defense. So I think Michigan's going to stick to what they do, and I don't think they're that tricky with their run game. They don't do a ton of counters.
Go downhill.
Yeah, like they don't really run a lot of jet sweep. They just kind of line up and want to bully you and say, here's where we are. Try and stop us. We think we're more physical than you.
That's where I'm curious, where their offensive line is really, really good, where the loss of Zach Zinter might come into play, because he looks like he was their best offensive lineman throughout the year. He was. And so I'm curious where that might come into play. And Washington, if they can just crowd the box, keep Blake Corum inside, not let him get outside the tackle, that there's a really good chance that they can bottle him up. I don't know if it's going to happen, but that's where I'm just going to be watching really, really closely when it comes to just containing Michigan's offense, because it all starts there. All right, Spencer, are you ready for some X factors? I want to see what,
Ooh, I love a good X factor. I love a good X factor.
Real depth of knowledge on this Washington roster. And that'll be right after we give a shout out to our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use. There's so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. And just a reminder to all the Husky fans out there that, might be in a state where you can do a little bit of betting. Washington's 4.5-point underdogs. And as Spencer very graciously reminded us earlier on the show, Washington is 5-0 as outright underdogs. So just something to keep in mind there. All right, Spencer, I want one offensive and one defensive underdog, or X factor. We've got underdogs in the brain here. One X factor on each side of the ball from you in this game. Could be anybody, and then I want a very quick reason why, and we're going to go back and forth on this a little bit.
I need to unmute my mic, of course. That'd be really helpful, I presume. But I'll start on the Washington side of the ball. I think your X factor is the one and only Jack Westover, because for Michigan, the receivers are going to command a lot of their attention, as they should, and you can lock them up as well as you want. I think Michigan's got a couple of good defensive backs from what I've seen this year. I'd be lying if I said I know them by name off the top of my head, but I think that Westover has had some really clutch moments this year, and the tight end position in general. I mean, season basically on the line on 3rd and goal against Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. They go to the 4th string tight end.
Quentin Moore, yeah.
Yeah, Quentin Moore. Like, there have been, and this is why I just continue to be really impressed with Ryan Grubb. He is so smart in so many different moments, and the execution for Washington in clutch spots is really, really good. And sometimes, oftentimes, most times even, it's just been Penix to Odunze on a back shoulder, whether against Oregon or Oregon State, the end around against Washington State. You can look at a number of moments where it's just Penix to Odunze, clutch moment, you need it. But you look at the 3rd down conversion early in the drive against Texas, Jack Westover. He had a big catch earlier in that game as well on a drive that led to points. The way they used the tight end on a 3rd and goal, like that's 3rd and goal. You don't get that. You're either 4th and goal to, one play. I mean, Washington probably goes for that because going up by 6 at that point, Oregon gets a touchdown. I don't know. I don't know, but not that I've ever thought about that particular scenario before. But
no way.
No, of course not. I've never thought about it. I couldn't tell you the exact assignment that was blown by Oregon on defense, but it was a brilliant play call because they used Odunze as a decoy there. And I won't be shocked in the slightest if in 1 or 2 key spots, those are not big, splashy, explosive plays. But if Washington doesn't keep that drive alive on the 3rd down play to Jack Westover, guess what? They're punting it back to Texas, leading by 6.
Yep.
That's a much different place to be. That's a much different place to be. So I think that's who it is on the Washington side of the ball. And it's not like I'm thinking he'll have a 7-catch, 80-yard, 2-touchdown game, though if he does, I'm taking a victory lap, baby. We're going to be running circles around, just in my own head, of course. But I think that for Michigan, it's who goes up against Troy Fautanu and or Roger Rosengarten, because those 2 guys have been so good this year. And you can pick whichever one you want, but Penix, when he's under pressure this year, like most quarterbacks, not the same guy. I think with Penix, it's even more so because he can make plays outside the pocket. I have seen him do it. I would also, and I think I'm being fair in this assessment, maybe I'm not, I would not describe it as his forte. And it is certainly not what he wants to do. He wants to play within structure, sit in the pocket, read the defense, slice and dice. That's where he's at his best. If you're able to get one of those tackles off balance and cause him to just even be thinking about it. And Michigan's pass rush this year, they don't have an Aiden Hutchinson, but they got some really good players. But guess what?
Yeah.
Oregon had some really good players too, and Penix was barely touched in Las Vegas. So that's what I keep coming back to when people talk, like the Texas defensive line, for instance. I heard from Texas fans anytime I talked about it on my show, Washington's offensive line isn't going to have a chair. Texas defensive line is so good. And I'm like, I'm just telling you guys, you haven't watched enough of Washington football. Their offensive line does not consistently allow pressure. Arizona State thought they had the fix to defending Washington with bringing A-gap pressure. And guess what? Dillon Johnson, I think that losing him on the ground is here's a hot take for you. Losing Dillon Johnson in the running game is less impactful than losing him in pass protection.
I see. I like that take. I see where you're coming from there, and I respect that. It does sound like he's going to play. We'll see in what kind of role.
Yeah. We'll see what he does. And obviously, I hope he plays. He's a fantastic player. I was really happy he got second team All Pac-12 this year because it's a passing team. But if you watch Pac-12 football, you know that Dillon Johnson was really good. But he is fantastic in pass protection. Like, he was the unsung hero, I think, against Oregon, because the Ducks saw what Arizona State did, and they tried to bring those pressures, which they were great at all year, with Jeffrey Bossa and Jamal Hill and Justin Jacobs and Evan Williams from the secondary and Tysheem Johnson. Those guys were getting home all year, and you go watch the tape. Dillon Johnson is stonewalling them, and that's giving Penix the time to stay in the pocket and deliver the ball down the field. So I think that that's the key for Michigan is you got to find a way to get pressure off the edge, because I think Washington mostly helps the interior with their protection schemes rather than the tackles because they're so good.
They're so comfortable leaving those guys out on islands.
Yep.
I have a whole lot of things to say to you. The first one is I'm really glad you keep bringing up this Oregon game, because for two reasons. One of them was Texas fans were in our comments here on YouTube saying, oh, well, like you guys keep bringing everything back to Oregon. It's because, that's a really good team that they beat. They beat them multiple times, twice. Yeah, they beat them twice.
And by the way, all the people prognosticating about, well, Texas should be ahead of Oregon. Really? Because I watched Oregon play Washington twice, and it was. I'll just say it was closer. It was a much more even fight. Oregon had one play to win the game in Seattle back in October. Texas had that because of a fluke injury.
Like a whole bunch of flukes.
Yes, several flukes.
About, time on the clock, all those sorts of things. So I'm gonna run through mine really quickly because I have one player on each side of the ball for Washington.
Okay.
On offense, I've got Jeremy Bernard. And I think that one of the reasons you just talked about the Dillon Johnson injury, I don't think that obviously they're ever going to keep him in there to, be a pass protector, but he's so just versatile in where he lines up. Jalen McMillan also lined up in the backfield a decent amount, but Jeremy Bernard has been doing that all season long. Like they lined him up and just handed the ball off to him in the Arizona game a bunch of times. So he's such a versatile player. He's so talented. He's just really good in space. And I think that that's somebody who he can make an impact in the punt return game. He can make an impact as a wide receiver. And just having all four of those guys out there is so tough to cover for anybody. It's hard enough to cover Washington's starting three. Adding Jeremy Bernard into the mix just is massive. And then on the defensive side, I've got defensive tackle MJ Ale. I was trying to stay away from starters in this game. Just whenever we do X factors, I try to stay away from starters and try to keep it to a rotational guy who I think could be a really crucial factor. But I want to go with MJ Ale because he did a really good job of getting into the backfield a couple of times against Texas in that game. And he's really big and can just be so stout in the run game at times. If him and Tuli Gasanoa, and let's say they bring in a Fatu Tuitele or a Jacob Bandis to help in extra run support, that they can just be so stout. And that's where it's going to come down to what we just talked about, as we put a bow on this whole conversation here, is he can be one of the guys to say, you're not going to move me today. And I'm not going to allow Blake Corum to get past me. I'm going to let Edefon Ulofoshio, Carson Bruno, whoever else come up behind me because I'm not letting the center, the left guard, the right guard, whoever it is, get past me and get into the second level and help spring Blake Corum. And that's just going to be so massive in this game because if you have to shut down the run, you get third and long. We all know how that goes. We're not going to, this isn't football 101, but I think that that's going to be absolutely massive in this game. Spencer, thank you so much for jumping on with us today. Really means a lot. And thank you all the everydayers for tuning in out there. And if you are new to the channel, please make sure you subscribe. We're going to have a whole lot of fun with just a whole bunch of national championship content. I'm going to be down in Houston starting Friday. So just stay tuned because who knows what kind of fun stuff we might be cooking up down there. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We are there. We are everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. Make sure to leave a like on this video. Leave us a 5-star review for your audio only. Leave a comment down below. All that stuff really helps out the channel. Really means a lot to us. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Friday.